Then we have internal security threats, which means that to launch those kinds of attacks, users need to have access, physical access to the network and knowledge of the internal network to begin with. Because it's not enough to have physical access to the network if you don't know what you're looking for. Of course, a skilled attacker or hacker, or however way you want to call it, if he gets access to the network, then he's going to find ways to grab his hands on the data. So one of the, let's say, most important steps in network security is to make sure that you have proper countermeasures implemented so that the attackers don't have physical access to the network. Because if that happens, pretty much the whole network is compromised. So it can happen that the attackers gain remote access to the network by using specific malicious codes, but if they get physical access, pretty much at that point it's all the security is gone. Like, for example, if you give an attacker physical access to a laptop or to a desktop, it doesn't matter how well safely guarded that PC is. It can even have hard drive encryption. It can even have, built-in operating system policies. If the attacker gets physical access to the network, he's going to find ways to work around the built-in security measures. Like, also that stands the same way for network devices. Like, you can secure a router or a firewall or a switch or any network device so that only specific people can get remote access for managing that device, so for telnet, SSH, or HTTP or HTTPS. But if you leave an attacker with physical console access to that device, then of course by rebooting or by making use of specific exploits, he's going to actually end up gaining access to the network device, which means at that point the attacker is in the network and has full access to all traffic flowing back and forth to that network device. It is generally less complex in nature, as I was saying. So one common use example about internal security threats from history, again, it was a disgruntled employee. So what that means is that the company has made one of the employees too stressed or too unhappy within the current work environment, and that makes that specific employee a possible attacker, either by itself. So the employee can decide by itself to actually steal data from the network in order to publish that away or sell that data away, or that employee, because he's unhappy, it can actually be let's say used by other people, by the real attackers, as a gateway in the network. So because an unhappy employee can be easily manipulated in order to do things that it will not commonly do under common, let's say, common working environment where the employee is happy and is being controlled. So generally less complex in nature, because as I was saying, as soon as you get access to physical access to the network, in general, if not enough countermeasures are deployed in a network, then it's going to be easier for the attacker to get their hands on the data, as opposed to launching a remote attack from the internet, where the attacker has to bypass a lot of security measures to get in the network and get his hands on the required data. It's harder to prevent with technical tools. Like, of course, firewall cannot prevent a physical theft. Like, one of the attacks can be, of course, also that the attacker gains physical access to the in the building, and then he just like if the attacker knows that specific sensitive data resides on a specific device, it can be a mobile device, a desktop, it can be a laptop or whatever, and if the attacker has physical access to the network, it doesn't even need to develop, advanced tools so he gets access to the device and then steals the data. He can actually just steal the laptop or the desktop to begin with, run away with it, and then, back home, he has enough time to see in which way he can get access to the data which resides on that specific device. So clearly that's the most easy way to steal data. So physical stealing of the device that where the data resides. So to internal security threats, for that it requires additional administrative and physical control measures to detect and prevent. So it's going to be what is called not non-technical tools, like we need physical locks to prevent a device from being stolen, surveillance cameras to detect, let's say, movement in restricted areas or at restricted time intervals. Like, for example, you wouldn't want somebody to be within the data center at 3 a.m. in the morning unless there was an authorization for a network configuration change or network migration, which was, of course, authorized to begin with, and everybody's aware that at that specific point in time, a couple of engineers should be granted access in the data center. But otherwise, if a camera detects movement and people moving around at 2 a.m. in the morning in the data center, that clearly is not something which should happen in general, and an action should be taken upon that detection. Or, for example, ID access policy. So you got to make sure that you grant access to specific locations within the offices only based on the employees' let's say required level of access, and that is being done based on IDs, based on a card ID policy. So like a specific user can get access only to specific physical locations of the building, not everywhere. Which what that means is that if an attacker wants to actually physically enter the building in order to steal some devices or some data, it means that first of all it actually requires such an ID in order to get access in there. Likewise, to prevent also internal security threats, you could implement what is called data loss prevention technologies, or as I was saying, you got to make sure that each user only has access, like physical access, but also logical access, only to what it needs to perform its job. So if, for example, I'm Christian, it means that if I'm in the technical department, it means there's no need for me to be even allowed within the finance department, not even physically, for example. Or there's no need for me to be allowed in the legal department, for example. Or that's physical access. Or if we speak about logical access, then there's no need for me to be allowed or to be allowed on the server where the finance department keeps the employee salaries or the company's profits or things like that.